Why can't America make those high-speed trains between states like Europe and Asia? One factor people often overlook is the intense love for personal freedom and autonomy that's embedded in the American psyche. The idea of hopping into your own car and hitting the open road is romanticized and deeply ingrained in the culture. It's about the flexibility to leave when you want, take the route you choose, and have your personal space while traveling. High-speed rail, while efficient, doesn't quite align with that spirit of individualism. Basically, it boils down to how large the US is and how sparsely the population is between major cities. Every high-speed rail network will need to be supported by the city-urban transit as well for people to move around. Not everyone lives in the middle of downtown. These factors, among the multitude of others, don't really make it viable economically yet. Cheap and convenient flying. Even in Europe with infrastructure in place, trains are struggling because they are often comparatively as expensive as a trip by car when carpooling. The US doesn't even have the railway network, thus it would be even more expensive. Furthermore, the US has cheaper cars and gas than Europe compared to wages. Outside of the Northeast and a few other spots in the Midwest and West Coast, the population density isn't there. The cost to build it would be astronomical given how much land you'd have to forcibly acquire. Everyone is in favor of grand infrastructure until their taxes go up and it's their house that has to get bulldozed. Mostly it's distance and population density. They work well between major population centers that have a lot of travel already. You need a lot of riders all the time to pay off those projects. We could pay for it with taxes, but we'd rather spend it on the world's largest military and wage war for 30 years non-stop. State governments have a lot more power and are more empowered to look after their own interests even if that conflicts with federal objectives. California might have a plan for a train line. At the moment the rails cross into Nevada or Oregon, they may have their own ideas about it. Mostly because Americans wouldn't ride them. It's not just about getting from one city or region to the other. It's about getting around when you get there. With exception of a few of our biggest cities, you would find it quite difficult to get around without a car. It's unfortunate. It's because of population density and the immense distances involved compared to much of Europe and Asia. I used a Tokyo subway system on a weekly basis and it's great, but it wouldn't make much sense in the part of Arizona I live in. The costs involved would not make sense. Public will do 2 years of big old car airline propaganda. Owning a car is just a desired thing in the United States that the infrastructure was then built to accommodate cars. We would need to start everything ground up public transportation-wise to make it feasible. High-speed trains can be used by rich and by poor people. However, in America, the rich do not like to travel with the poor. Can you imagine a US senator on a train? Ridiculous, right? Guess who is in charge of deciding if these trains are built, or that is why? A lot of American major metropolitan cities are based on fault lines on coastlines or hurricane-prone areas in the west, south, and east regions. Imagine building all that framework for an earthquake or a hurricane freeze to completely destroy. That's why there isn't a desire for community transport. We much prefer individual transport cars and trucks and control. When our desires are such, funding, usage, and motivation to construct community transport trains, ferries, buses is nil. To go very fast, train lines must be very straight. Trains need to slow down around bends. Charting a path that's straight between major cities would require significant use of eminent domain, which is a non-starter politically. Where in Europe has actual high-speed trains? The UK just cancelled their big high-speed build, and the politics of building infrastructure in China, Japan, etc. is so vastly different from the US that it's barely comparable. Companies that want to sell cars have too much money involved in supporting car infrastructure and lobbying against efficient public transport to want to let a not car-centric America develop. They can. Indeed, some high-speed rail links do exist in limited form. They just have no desire to do so. America has a much more deeply ingrained car culture than the rest of the world. Probably because most places the train would take you would require a car. So I take a train from Detroit to Indianapolis. Great. Now if I need to go anywhere, I need to rent a car. Because of the 100 years of city development centered around the car. Everything wrong about urban development is at the US and Canada in that sense. Because high-speed railroads are usually costly public sector infrastructure investments, and the Americans hate those because they require taxes, along with the public infrastructure and tax concerns. The population's density of the United States versus Europe does need to be considered. The federal government pays 90% of the cost for new highways. So way too much untold highway got built, 'cause they're expensive, and we already have a bunch of infrastructure for highways and roads and the like, because we like to spend our money on turning brown kids all over the world into pink mist and dust. You should read about why Elon came up with this stupid Hyperloop scam. It's an interesting read. A lot of good points in here. And I think another big part is just the sheer size of America. I'm not American, but from what I understand, domestic flights are relatively cheap and easier. What? You don't like the stellar service and leg room on our domestic airlines? For shame. We did in Florida. Same company is building in California. It costs more than flying ATM for them to use the cars and sell all for the cars and make money out of it. We would fuck it up. You just know it would end up being low quality, because there is this marvelous invention called the airplane.